This podcast was produced using artificial intelligence and refined by human editors. Hello, adventurous souls, and welcome to Travel with Lara and Luca. I'm your ever-curious globetrotter, Lara.
And I'm Luca, her trusty sidekick with a penchant for all things historical. Today's journey takes us to the Emerald Isle's legendary heart, Dublin.
That's right, Luca. We're about to take a deep dive into the city known for its literary prowess, raucous pubs, and those cobbled streets that have more stories than we could ever tell.
Oh, the stories we could try to tell, though. This episode is absolutely brimming with them, from iconic sights to Dublin's delicious cuisine.
And let's not forget those hidden gems we love to stumble upon. Plus, plenty of must-see places. If we were to list them all, we'd be here for days.
Indeed, and knowing us, Lara, we'll find a way to sprinkle in weird facts and untold tales of Dublin's rich history. I already have a few oddities up my sleeve.
I have no doubt, Luca. And for all you savvy globetrotters, we'll be dishing out some expert travel tips to make your visit to Dublin as smooth as Jameson whiskey.
Ooh, a smooth segue there, Lara. And as if that wasn't enough to stir your wanderlust, we've also handpicked some enticing side excursions that beckon beyond the city limits.
But before we get into all that, let's set the stage. Dublin, a city that feels like a village and buzzes like a metropolis, where the history is living and bread is well and truly soda.
Absolutely. It's where you can roam from ancient manuscripts to tech startups all in one afternoon. And if Dublin's walls could talk, they'd likely sing with the echoes of poets and playwrights.
Oh, they'd be quite the ensemble. Dublin isn't just a city, you see. It's a personality, a friend you haven't seen in ages, but reconnect with instantly over a pint.
Or perhaps over a cup of tea in a cozy nook, whilst a fiddler plays a jig in the background, complemented by the soft patter of rain on the windows.
As unpredictable as that rain may be. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Our expert travel tips will have you covered for that. Literally.
Speaking of cover, did you know Dublin is a UNESCO City of Literature? I mean, if words could form the cobblestones, Joyce, Wilde, and Yeats have paved the streets here.
Ah, the weight of words and footsteps alike. And of course, those legendary Dublin doors, colorful sentinels guarding the city's tales. A visit to Dublin is as much about encountering the past as it is embracing the present.
The present and future, indeed. Because while tradition is fiercely cherished, adaptability is Dublin's middle name. Between the tech giants, the startups, the fusion food spots, and third-wave coffee shops, there's no question. Dublin spins many a yarn.
It's a tale of two cities combined into one beautiful, sometimes paradoxical, always intriguing capital.
A city ever teetering on the edge of modernism and tradition, where 1 minute you're tracing the steps of ancient Celtic warriors, and the next, sipping cocktails in a sleek rooftop bar.
And that's Dublin, a city where the rivers run with history and the laughter flows just as readily. You arrive with expectations and leave with experiences that tether your heart to the cobbled pathways and the emerald sheen of the parks.
You just can't help but leave a piece of your heart here, can you?
Absolutely not. And we're certain, dear listeners, that by the end of this podcast, you'll be ready to jump on the next plane, boat, or even a flock of swans if it would whisk you away to this charming city.
Swans, you say? Well, Lara, let's not ruffle any feathers, and instead let's embark on our auditory adventure through Dublin's iconic sights, which, believe it or not, is where we're heading in the next segment.
Iconic sites like the soaring spires, ancient libraries, and of course, the legendary castles where ghosts might be the least surprising encounter.
But first, let's crack open the book on some of these legendary spots and see what tales jump out of the pages.
So grab your comfortable shoes, maybe a notebook, and a sense of wonder, because you're going to want to remember every detail.
Absolutely. And remember, in Dublin, more often than not, your path will be paved with words and whimsy.
Hello again, dear Wanderlust friends. You're tuning in to Travel with Lara and Luca, and today is all about the iconic sights of Dublin.
That's right, Lara. These are the places that postcards are made of, the ones you absolutely cannot miss. And we're starting with the educational heart of the city, Trinity College. It's not just any college, is it?
Absolutely not, Luca. Trinity College is an architectural marvel that dates back to 1592 and walking through its hallowed corridors feels like a journey through time.
And at the center of it all is the famous Book of Kells, a manuscript that captures the very essence of medieval artistry. Don't you think?
Couldn't agree more. The intricate designs, the bold colors, it really is a masterpiece.
And then there's the long room in the old library. Now that's a sight that book lovers might find themselves drooling over.
Oh, to be surrounded by those ancient tomes. It's like every book has a soul whispering stories of the past.
From the soulful whisper of books to the echo of royal footsteps, Dublin Castle is next on our iconic tour.
Indeed, from Vikings to British royalty, Dublin Castle has seen guests of all sorts, and every room tells a tale, don't you think?
Each more captivating than the last. And you know, it's not just the architecture that's evolved over the centuries. Dublin Castle has been everything from a fortress to a government building.
My favorite is perhaps the Chapel Royal with its stunning Gothic Revival architecture. There's something about those spires that just tickles my fancy.
From the spires of the castle to the open expanses of Phoenix Park, the largest enclosed public park in any capital city in Europe.
Yes, Phoenix Park is vast and verdant. There's a special kind of calmness there amidst the hustle and bustle of the city.
And let's not forget the deer. I do love those moments when they decide to grace us with their presence, completely unfazed by the city life around them.
Speaking of getting lost, ever find yourself just wandering aimlessly there, Luca?
More times than I care to admit, Lara. But then again, getting lost in Phoenix Park is an experience in itself.
Indeed it is. And with that, we transition from the tranquility of the park to the aromatic and mouth-watering discussion of Irish cuisine in our next segment.
All right, Lara, if I may be so bold, it's time to turn our attention to one of my favorite subjects, the delectable, the scrumptious, the utterly divine world of Dublin cuisine.
Oh, you're singing my tune, Luca. I'm already mentally savoring every bite. Dublin's food scene is much like the city itself, isn't it? Full of history, yet brimming with vibrant modern twists.
It's a fusion of old and new, for sure. And nothing starts the day in Dublin quite like a hearty Irish breakfast with all the trimmings.
Ah, the full Irish. Explain the essential components for those who might not have had the pleasure, Luca.
Well, first, your plate will be graced with perfectly fried up eggs. Some prefer them poached, but I'm a fry man myself. Then you've got your sausages, bacon, which is more like what the Americans call Canadian bacon, black and white pudding, and before you ask, it's not the sweet kind, and of course, a tomato.
And don't forget the beans. You know, my first Irish breakfast was a revelation. I used to consider beans a strictly lunch or later affair, but I was wrong. So wrong.
That it was a crime against breakfast?
A culinary crime of the highest order.
And the ideal companion to this feast, a slice or three of soda bread, thick with creamy Irish butter.
Isn't it just poetry on a plate? Now, let's sail to the coast, metaphorically at least, and talk about the cornerstone of Dublin's seafood scene.
Oh, the treasures of the sea. Dublin Bay prawns, oysters fresh as the breeze rolling off the Liffey, and a personal favorite of mine, fish and chips. Dubliners have perfected the art of crispy batter and fluffy steaming fish like nowhere else.
I'll raise you on that, Luca. Ever had a Dublin lawyer?
Not been in much legal trouble myself, Lara, but oh, you mean the lobster? Drenched in whiskey and cream? How could I forget?
Exactly, law and seafood at its best. Now how about we wade into the warm, comforting waters of a well-made Irish stew?
Ah, you've hit upon a contentious issue, Lara. There's debate about which meat to use, lamb or beef.
Lamb. It has to be lamb, right? I mean, there's no contest.
Ah, but beef stew has its defenders. Let's agree both are divine after a day walking the cobbled streets, and leave it at that.
Peace declared. But we can't discuss Dublin's cuisine without mentioning boxty.
For those uninitiated, boxty is a traditional Irish potato pancake, and it's sodden good. Crispy on the outside, soft and warm within, it's versatile. You can have it with just about anything.
Speaking of versatility, Luca, Dublin coddle, the dish that cleans out the cupboard and fills up the soul.
Now, there's a dish with a flavor as unique as its maker, with its sausage, bacon, and potatoes. It's the very essence of home cooking, a go-to dish to warm you during those chilly Dublin evenings.
And as one enjoys this array of culinary delights, debating the best spot to savor a creamy pint of the black stuff?
or how many ways there are to enjoy potatoes.
Or what combination of the full Irish is the breakfast of champions?
You'll find yourself perched on the edge of the River Liffey, the heart of the city, sipping a toasty cup of tea with a slice of freshly baked soda bread, watching the world drift by, and thinking,
That life could be much, much worse.
much worse indeed. But our taste trip through Dublin is hardly over, right, Lara? We've talked iconic meals, mouth-watering seafood, and the soul-soothing Irish stew. What's next on our menu?
Well, Luca, we'll move on from the sustenance to the sublime, discovering the city's hidden gems, places off the beaten path that most tourists and even some locals might not know exist.
Can't wait for that revelation. But for now,
Let's toast to Dublin's delectable offerings with the kind of enthusiasm that would make even the most stoic Dubliner smile.
to Dublin's delicious cuisine, may it continue to nourish our bodies and delight our souls.
Cheers to that, Luca. And with our bellies full and hearts light with the joy of culinary discovery, we'll take a brief pause before uncovering those elusive hidden gems of Dublin in our next segment. Stay tuned. All right, Luca, moving on from the mouth-watering topic of Irish cuisine, let's dive into Dublin's hidden gems. The places that don't always make it onto the front of the postcards, but have charm and character to spare.
Ah, the hidden gems. You know, Lara, there's something truly magical about discovering those spots in a city that feel like they were just waiting for you to turn the corner.
Precisely. And for me, nothing says hidden gem quite like Marsh's Library. Nestled in the heart of the city, it's Ireland's oldest public library, and it's been standing since 1707.
It's like stepping back in time with those oak bookcases and the smell of old paper. Fun fact, it still has the original cages where readers were locked in with rare books to prevent theft.
That's true dedication to book security, isn't it? I can just imagine some of those readers plotting how to smuggle out a tome or two.
Next up, we're talking about a little place that doesn't always make the usual tourist lists, the Little Museum of Dublin. It's like someone took the essence of Dublin and crammed it into an 18th century townhouse.
It's the best crash course in Dublin culture you could hope for. You've got everything from U2 memorabilia to artifacts from Dublin's involvement in both world wars.
But what captures me the most is that the entire collection was donated by the public. It's the people's history on display.
That's the beauty of it. And to keep things artsy, let's move on to the dynamic street art scene, like that stunning mural of the legendary Irish writer Oscar Wilde.
You mean the one in Marion Square? It's brilliant how it captures Wilde's wit and flamboyance, and with the added bonus of being Instagrammable.
Yes, Instagrammable, the 21st century benchmark for art appreciation.
Precisely. Dublin street art gives us a glimpse into the modern soul of this ancient city. Each piece tells a story, whether it's political, personal, or just playful.
And you never know when a new piece might pop up. It's like a citywide treasure hunt, where the streets are gallery walls.
Speaking of treasures, let's not forget about the cobblestone alleys of Temple Bar. Yes, it's known for its pubs and nightlife, but in the daylight, there are these quaint little shops and markets to explore.
There's a spot there that I adore, the Icon Factory, where local artists transform icons of Irish culture into vibrant art. It's a non-profit that revitalizes the alleyways with color and creativity.
Dublin does seem to hide its gems in plain sight. And the thing is, you've got to walk the city to find these places.
That's what makes exploring so rewarding, though. With every step, you peel back another layer of Dublin's story. And just when you think you've seen it all,
bam! You stumble upon an ancient well right in the middle of the city, like the one under that glass floor in the Norseman pub. How many pints do you think have been raised directly above centuries of history?
oh, countless, I'd wager. And I'd raise one more to those Norsemen for choosing such a fine spot for a well.
Now, before we raise our glasses too high, we've got to talk about Dublin Castle. It's one of the few moated castles left in Ireland.
Ah, Dublin Castle, the unsung hero of castles. With its beautifully restored medieval tower and gardens, it feels like you've just walked onto a film set.
Not to mention, it's mostly run by volunteers, which adds a lovely community feel to the place.
It really goes to show you the pride Dubliners take in preserving their history while still welcoming the curious traveler.
Here's to the curious traveler. May they always find the hidden nooks and crannies that bring a city to life. Speaking of life, though, Dublin's past is riddled with peculiar tales and locales, which brings us to our next segment.
That's right, Luca. In our next segment, we'll unearth the weird facts about Dublin that you might not believe at first blush. Stay tuned and ready your eyebrows. They'll be on a one-way trip to your hairline shortly.
Must-see places in Dublin. Do you even start anywhere else but the most iconic drink associated with Ireland?
The holy grail of brewery experiences, the Guinness Storehouse.
A pilgrimage spot for anyone who's even remotely familiar with the dark stout.
And for those who aren't, it's a brilliant introduction, right? I mean, the Storehouse is like a temple dedicated to the craft of brewing.
Absolutely. You start at the bottom with the ingredients.
Water, barley, hops, and yeast. The building, designed in the shape of a pint glass, could it get any more festive?
Then there's the tasting rooms as you ascend. A chance to indulge in the ritual of swirling, sniffing, and sipping.
But you know, it's the gravity bar at the top that truly takes your breath away. That panoramic view of Dublin, it feels like you're a part of the city's skyline.
Enjoying a pint of Guinness there is bordering on a spiritual experience.
Cue the angelic choir.
Speaking of spiritual, St. Patrick's Cathedral, Lara. You've spent quite a bit of time there, I reckon?
I have. And it's not just the architecture that's stunning with its spires piercing the Dublin sky.
But it's also the cathedral's ability to hold centuries of history, from saints to scholars, the walls echoing with stories of yesteryears.
Like Jonathan Swift, we're talking about the author of Gulliver's Travels, resting in a corner of the cathedral. It's surreal reading his epitaph right there.
Surreal, and yet somehow grounding. To think of the history, the people that have walked those aisles.
Luca, we can't talk about must-see places in Dublin without a detour to the notorious Kilmainham Gale.
Notorious, and yet incredibly important to the Dublin spirit. The Gall is a symbol of the quest for Irish independence.
You walk through those cold, dank cells and corridors, you can't help but feel a chill. The weight of history is palpable.
The leaders of various uprisings were imprisoned there, even executed. It's a sobering reminder of the struggles and sacrifices.
And isn't it incredible how it's preserved? You're stepping directly into the past.
They've done a stellar job. Plus the guided tours, they're just impeccable. Storytelling at its finest. Dramatic, informative, and at times, heart-wrenching.
Definitely a must-see place. But let's lighten the mood, shall we? Luca, what would you say is your ultimate Dublin must-see?
I think I'll surprise you here, Lara. Howth?
Howth? That's not in Dublin City proper.
But it's the quintessential Dublin day out. A short train ride, and you're in a picturesque fishing village with seafood, cliff walks, and a landscape that could inspire a dozen paintings.
True, it's the Dublin experience extended into nature. Time seems to slow down there.
Exactly. A jaunt to Howth is like the credits rolling after a fantastic film. You've seen the highs, the lows, the stories, and then you get a moment to just breathe.
And process it all with a scenic view. Can't argue with that. Dublin really does have so much to offer, doesn't it?
An understatement. You have the modern and the medieval, the lively and the laid back, all within arm's reach.
Well said, partner. And on that note, as we close off this stroll through Dublin's must-see places.
Next, we'll delve into some weird facts about Dublin that might just have you raising an eyebrow or two.
Or perhaps revealing the secrets that Dublin has tucked away in its colorful sleeves.
All right, Dublin lovers, hold on to your hats, or should I say your leprechaun-sized buckles, because it's time for some weird facts about Dublin.
Indeed, Luca. Were you aware, for example, that in Dublin's history, it was once illegal to be a begrudger? If you don't celebrate your neighbor's good fortune, you could have been fined.
Is that so? I can think of a few begrudgers that might have lightened their pockets in those days. Now, for a slightly more peculiar law, did you know bathing in the nude during daylight hours was against the law here? It was only in 2017 that this old law was finally taken off the books.
Gosh, that must have made for some rather quest-time dashes into the Irish Sea. Now, how about Dublin's famous St. Michan's Church, home to the city's most naturally mummified bodies?
Naturally mummified? Like without all those fancy Egyptian herbs and spices?
Exactly. The air in the crypt is so dry, it preserved the bodies all on its own. You can actually visit them if you've got a strong stomach.
Speaking of strong, it's in Dublin where someone wanted to build a giant beer pipeline across the city. Dreams and schemes, Lara. Dreams and schemes.
And let's not forget the time when Dublin decided to employ a whale measurer. Yes, it was someone's job to measure any whale that washed up on the shores of the River Liffey.
Imagine the job interview for that position. Do you have experience with oversized rulers and a tolerance for the smell of fish? On the topic of jobs, Dublin was also the site of one of the first ever taxi driver insurrections in 1920. The cabbies went on strike against unlicensed drivers.
It would seem Dublin's always been a city of revolutionaries, even among the taxi ranks. Now, for a sweet fact, did you know that Dublin is the place where chocolate milk was invented by a physician named Hans Sloane in the 1700s? He thought regular milk was nauseating.
Thank you, Dr. Sloan, from all the kids who prefer their milk choco-flavored. Switching gears, imagine finding a bomb in your backyard. During World War II, Dublin was accidentally bombed, and one of the bombs didn't explode until a poor gardener dug it up years later.
That had to be the ultimate bad day at work. And speaking of digging, it's rumored that Dubliners in the 18th century would have dueling with shovels over trivial conflicts like whose turn it was to pick up a tab.
You have to admire their commitment to customer service, I suppose. Here's another for you. Dublin's O'Connell Bridge isn't just wider than it is long. It's said to be the only bridge in Europe that can make that claim.
Quite the claim to fame, Luca. Now, did you know that one of Dublin's most interesting characters was named Molly Malone? And legend has it she was a fishmonger by day and a less mentionable profession by night?
No way to prove that, but she did get a statue in her honor, and a song that everyone can belt out after a pint or two. And for fans of the weird, check this out. There's a bit of an underworld legacy here, as Dublin once had a vast system of tunnels under the city, some of which have been discovered beneath bank vaults and even pubs.
Oh, the tales those tunnels could tell. And speaking of tales, here's a strange one. It's rumored that a vast fortune lies beneath Dublin Castle, left there by the secretive old Irish society called the Hellfire Club.
A fortune, you say? Maybe it's time for a Travel with Lara and Luca treasure hunt special. In other strange happenings, did you know Dublin hosts an annual leprechaun hunt? Don't worry, it's all for fun, with participants looking for little ceramic statues hidden around the city.
All that hunting just to be tricked by a figure from a children's tale. But speaking of children's tales, Bram Stoker, the creator of Dracula, was a Dubliner through and through. Some say that Dublin's dark and winding streets inspired his creepy count.
So we've covered laws, jobs, and legendary folklore. I must say, weird facts are a delightful way to uncover a city's quirks. And these little-known stories really make me love Dublin even more.
Quirky is just how we like our cities, isn't it? And speaking of which, get ready to time travel with us, as up next we'll delve into the rich tapestry that is Dublin's history. From Viking settlers to modern-day marvels, we've got history covered.
Stay tuned, and we'll uncover the layers of time as if we were Dublin's very own historians, minus the dusty tomes and candlelight, though a bit of whimsy and imagination will certainly be present.
See you in a few shakes of a lamb's tail, or should we say, a few shakes of a Viking's oar.
Either or indeed. Until then, my historical compatriots.
History buff or not, when you set foot in Dublin, you're walking on layers and layers of storied past, aren't you, Luca?
Absolutely, Lara. Dublin is a palimpsest, a city written and rewritten over time, and today's segment 6 is all about that rich tapestry of history.
Speaking of history, let's wind back to the era of longboats and rugged warriors. Yes, the Vikings. They left more than just a few helmets behind, didn't they?
Oh, they surely did. Viking Dublin, or Dufflin as they called it, was a bustling hub of trade and craftsmanship. In fact, places like Woodquay, right in the heart of today's city center, were once waterfronts of the Viking settlement.
And these Norsemen, they not only raided, mind you, they traded, laying the groundwork for Dublin to grow into the city it is today. But let's not romanticize them too much. They were a fierce and formidable force in their time.
Right. Let's give those monks at the monasteries a moment of silence for all the manuscripts that went poof in the Viking bonfires.
From raiders to rulers, though, the Vikings eventually merged into the fabric of Dublin. You've got to wonder, do our listeners have a bit of Viking in them, perhaps?
Maybe a trace or two. Speaking of which, let's time jump a couple of centuries to another group who made quite the entrance, the Normans. Dublin Castle, the city's heart in so many ways, was initially a Norman fortification.
And that's just the tip of the historical iceberg. The Normans brought over new architecture, new laws, administrative systems, and of course, the majestic St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Now, if we leap forward to the 16th and 17th centuries, talk about a turbulent period. Tudors, Stuarts, Cromwell, battles and sieges that really tested Dublin's mettle.
Oh, Cromwell, ye are no favorite son of Ireland, for sure. His conquest of Dublin left scars that are yet to fade from the collective Irish memory.
The shifts in power are woven through the city's architecture, too. You'll find Tudor roses beside Celtic patterns, and in the next corner, a statue from the time of Queen Victoria.
Which brings us to more modern times, and dare I say, a defining moment in Irish history, the Easter Rising of 1916.
The proclamation of the Irish Republic, read by Padraig Pearse himself outside the General Post Office. A moment so potent, it echoes through O'Connell Street, even today.
Those bullet holes in the GPO facade serve as stark reminders of the fight for Irish independence. The rebels held out for 6 days against all odds.
And while the immediate aftermath was tragic, with executions and imprisonments, it paved the way for Ireland's path to independence, stirring a sense of nationalism like never before.
It's touching, isn't it? The resilience and the relentless spirit of Dubliners emerging from centuries of conquests and rebellions with their humor and persistence intact.
Dublin's history, Lara, it's like a dance of triumph and tragedy. Look at Kilmainham Gaol, a symbol of oppression, now a beacon of freedom and remembrance.
It's in that dance you mentioned, Luca, that we discover figures like Daniel O'Connell and Charles Stewart Parnell, champions of liberty and, of course, Dubliners by choice or birth.
And speaking of history makers, who's your favorite Dublin historical figure, Lara?
That's like picking your favorite child. But if pressed, I'd say James Joyce. He captured the soul of the city like no other. And even though he spent much of his life abroad, Dublin was his muse.
A fine pick. For me, it's got to be Jonathan Swift, the Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral, and a bitingly witty social commentator with Gulliver's Travels.
I can see the Swift in you, Luca. The Swift sense of humor, at least.
I'll take that as a compliment. Now, let's imagine, just for fun, if Joyce and Swift bumped into each other at a pub in modern Dublin. Mamber.
I bet they'd have a field day satirizing us, the Instagrammers and the podcasters alike. But their works would probably still find their way onto our e-readers and audiobooks.
Without a doubt. And you know, Lara, this historical chit-chat makes me think of all the practical knowledge we've gained over the years, too.
Which is a subtle way to transition, I believe. Join us in our next segment, where we'll delve into our treasure chest of expert travel tips, ensuring your stay in Dublin is smooth as a pint of stout.
Stay tuned to hear about navigating those cobbled streets, dealing with the infamous Irish weather, and perhaps how to charm the locals.
Here we are, getting into the nitty-gritty of our Dublin adventure with some expert travel tips.
The real gold for getting around Dublin and blending in with the locals. Shall I kick us off, Lara?
Be my guest, Luca.
Right. The first thing you need to know about Dublin, like any great city, is transportation. Dublin's fairly compact, so walking is often your best bet, but for longer stretches, the Luas tram system, the DART trains, and the buses will be your best mates.
Couldn't agree more. Now about those buses, the routes can be a bit like a bowl of spaghetti at times, so keep that route map handy. Oh, and the Leap visitor card. It's a must. Unlimited travel on most public transport for a set period of time.
Not to mention the savings. But you know what really gets me? Tourists trying to use paper notes on the bus. Remember folks, coins only. unless you fancy an unintentional donation to the Dublin bus services.
And I have to say, understanding Dublin's little quirks takes you from tourist to savvy traveler. Like the fact that Dublin is in the rare position of having a 0 postcode. That's a fun one to throw around.
Speaking of Dublin quirks, let's talk weather. You'll want to dress like an onion when you're in Dublin.
An onion? Do elaborate, my layered friend.
You know, layers, Lara. The weather's changeable. You might wake up to rain, need a sweater by lunch, and end the day basking in the sun at St. Stephen's Green.
True. Here's a tip. Always carry a lightweight waterproof jacket, not one of those flimsy rain ponchos. When the wind picks up, you don't want to be wrestling with your rain gear like a kite.
Now, for those planning to socialize, can we teach them the essential toast, Lara?
Oh, you mean slainte? That's your go-to when clinking glasses in the pub. It's pronounced slán cha, and it's akin to saying cheers. Divine it is to toast with good company.
Let's not forget the pub etiquette. That round system can be quite the cultural landmine for the uninitiated. If you're part of a group, everyone is expected to buy a round of drinks when it's their turn.
And if you've had enough, opt out early or risk the wrath of your newfound friends. Now, if you bump into someone, a quick sorry or excuse me goes a long way. Politeness is currency here.
Niceties. Speaking of which, our listeners should know how much Dubliners love a good chat. Be prepared to discuss the weather, the last match, or give your life story to the taxi driver.
Every taxi ride's a chance to make a new friend. But moving from chatty to cultural, we must talk about the Irish language.
A gaelge, a beautiful language that you'll see on all the signs. It's not widely spoken, but show some interest and you'll win hearts.
Absolutely. Know that a failte means a welcome, and a go raibh maith agat is your way of saying thank you. That's revma agut for those taking notes.
Then there's craic. It's not what you think, it means fun. If you're asked, what's the craic? It's like saying, what's up, or what's happening.
Speaking of craic, what about recommending a book or two for those looking to dive into Dublin's literary heritage?
Oh, I'd suggest anything by James Joyce or Oscar Wilde to get you into the Dublin spirit. Ulysses if you're feeling ambitious, but a compilation of Wilde's quotes will have you in stitches.
Anyone who's brushed up on their Wilde can win over any literary Dubliner at the pub. Now, what about keeping connected? Wi-Fi is your friend, and you'll find free hotspots in many cafes and pubs.
It's almost time to wrap up, but let's tell them about Sunday morning shopping.
Sundays in Dublin are splendid. Stroll down to the markets, folks. Not only are they a treat, but you'll find lovely keepsakes, and you can munch on some artisanal treats while you wander.
Oh, and don't be afraid to go off the beaten track. Dubliners respect a bit of curiosity. Wander down a side street, pop into a quirky shop, and see where the road takes you.
The thing is, in Dublin, a little effort goes a long way. Be friendly, be curious, and don't rush. The city reveals itself in layers, just like Luca's onion metaphor.
And before we peel away from these expert tips, Lara, what's on the docket next?
Coming up, we'll transport you to the delightful excursions just beyond Dublin's doorstep. There's magic to be found beyond the city limits, and we're eager to share it with you.
Ah, the enchanting outskirts. But for now, let's say slán go fóill to our expert travel tips segment.
Slán go fóill indeed. Until next time, it's goodbye for now, dear listeners. Alrighty, travel aficionados, we're zooming out slightly from the heart of Dublin to explore what lies beyond its charismatic borders. Welcome to segment 8, all about side excursions.
Exactly, because while Dublin is a treasure chest of culture, history, and fun, some of the real gems are just a short jaunt away. Isn't that right, Lara?
You bet it is, Luca. In fact, just so our listeners know, these side excursions are easy trips, perfect for a day away from the city hustle.
So Lara, share with us your magical mystery tour just outside Dublin.
Prepare yourself for misty mornings and enchanting tales, because my top pick is the mystical Glendalough, located in the Wicklow Mountains.
Ah, beautiful choice. The Valley of Two Lakes. It's truly something out of a storybook, isn't it?
Totally. Glendalough is home to one of the most important monastic sites in Ireland and offers this peaceful, tranquil vibe that's hard to beat.
And if you're into a bit of a walk, there are trails for all levels. You can saunter or huff and puff your way through some of Ireland's most breathtaking scenery.
Exactly. The Spink Walk offers an eagle's eye view of the valley that'll have you feeling like you're in an epic Celtic legend.
Speaking of legends, Lara, I bet you've got a story up your sleeve about Glendalough?
Oh, you know me too well. Legend says that St. Kevin, the founder of the monastic site, threw a woman into the lake for trying to tempt him.
That's a rather drastic way to deal with temptation, if you ask me.
Most certainly. But history aside, my favorite part has always been the old, round tower, standing tall amongst the ruins, like a lighthouse guiding the spiritually shipwrecked.
Beautifully put, Lara. From guiding lighthouses to coastal trails, my side excursion recommendation is the seaside.
Ah, the call of the Irish Sea.
Exactly. Just a few miles from Dublin, you've got spots like Howth and Bray.
Howth is a favorite of mine, with cliff walks that offer this panoramic sea spectacle that's sure to dazzle any visitor.
And let's not forget the fresh seafood. I consider it a cardinal sin to leave Howth without trying some.
Cardinal sins aside, Bray is another seaside gem, with a Victorian-era promenade that's as charming as a scene from a period film.
Right, you can almost see the ladies with their parasols, and the gentlemen in their boater hats strolling along the prom.
And the climb up to Bray Head, it rewards you with views worth every huff and puff. I think our listeners might even catch a glimpse of Welsh mountains on a clear day.
Imagine that, Ireland in the foreground, Wales in the distance. Now that's a sight to remember.
But what if our listeners are looking for something Castle Lie?
Malta, no, not the country, the castle, Malahide Castle to be exact.
Ah, of course, just a stone's throw from Dublin, Malahide Castle has it all: history, ghosts, and a botanical garden.
It's that perfect blend of grandeur and the supernatural. The Talbot family sure knew where to build a home.
Plus, every good castle comes with its ghost, and Malahide has its fair share.
Stories of the Lady in White send delicious shivers down the spine.
I love a delicious shiver, Luca. But speaking of delicious, let's venture a tad farther afield, to the Boyne Valley.
There, among the green rolling hills, history aficionados will find their hearts racing. This is the land of ancient tombs like Newgrange, even older than the Egyptian pyramids.
Walking inside Newgrange feels like you're a part of Ireland's primordial history, doesn't it?
It's like stepping into a time machine. And to think for thousands of years, the winter solstice sunlight has illuminated its inner chamber.
It's an exquisite confluence of astronomy, spirituality, and of course, a touch of that Irish magical realism.
I like to think of the Boyne Valley as Ireland's version of a history theme park, minus the roller coasters.
Unless you count the emotional roller coaster of standing where ancient chieftains and druids once roamed.
Another day, another journey through time, just a hop, skip, and a jump from Dublin.
A hop, skip, and a journey packed with the echoes from Ireland's soulful past.
So, whether our listeners want to soak in the sea air or tread the paths of history, the outskirts of Dublin truly offer a delightful escape.
They certainly do, Luca, each one with a character and a story of its own, waiting for eager explorers to uncover and make new memories.
Memories woven from the very tapestry of Ireland's rich heritage.
And speaking of memories, I think it's time we made some new ones back in the heart of Dublin, don't you think?
I think our next segment is calling, where we'll wrap things up and share our final thoughts on this enchanting city.
So folks, as we say a temporary goodbye to the scenic views and tales of the countryside, get ready for our conclusion. And trust us, it'll be a heartfelt slán go foy.
Absolutely. So stay tuned, because you won't want to miss our final musings on the fair city of Dublin.
Well, my dear Dublin adventurers, we've weaved our way through the streets, the tales, and the very fabric that makes Dublin the city it is today.
And what a tapestry it's been. From the historic walls of Trinity College to the savory delights of an Irish breakfast, each thread has been as colorful and vibrant as the last.
We've danced around hidden gems and must-see places with all the grace of a river dance troupe, and I must say, with slightly more coordination.
Oh, quite right, Lara. We've traversed timelines from the Viking invasions to modern-day whispers of the city's heartbeat. Every era has painted another layer onto this magnificent urban canvas.
It's been a journey of discovery and rediscovery. I mean, who would have thought that the haunted spirits of Dublin's past would be upstaged by the living, breathing city herself?
Not to mention the weird facts we've unearthed. like Dublin being the original home of the Black Pool, Dublin, which truly took me by surprise, Lara. How about you?
Definitely. The city never fails to teach us something new, no matter how many times we think we've gotten to know her. Dublin is like an old friend who always has another story to tell.
Speaking of stories, it's been an absolute treat to chat about our favorite historical figures. James Joyce, with his riveting words, still echoing through the cobblestones of his city.
And courageous Molly Malone, forever immortalized in bronze and in the chorus of a familiar tune that hums through the city streets.
And with that, we've given you our nuggets of wisdom for navigating this city. Our travel tips, though occasionally humorous, are meant to guide you as reliably as the St. James's Gate has been guiding thirsty travelers to the source of the black stuff.
We've bid you to venture beyond with side excursions to the lush landscapes that cradle Dublin, to the charming towns where history and modernity walk hand in hand along the crashing coastline.
I think I speak for both of us when I say, we hope you've fallen for Dublin just as hard as those mischievous Irish winds that might sweep you off your feet when you're on the Ha'penny Bridge without warning.
Yes, Dublin might just have that effect, ensnaring your heart with the kind of enchanting spell that makes you want to stay just a little longer, or perhaps not leave at all.
Before we wrap up, let's take a moment to soak in the essence of Dublin. A pause, like the tranquil waters in the Grand Canal, reflecting the city life buzzing around it.
Enchanting, isn't it? Whether it's your first time getting to know Dublin or your 100th, there's always a quiet corner, a lively pub, or a historical gem waiting to welcome you.
And maybe you've got some Dublin stories of your own to share. Have you wandered down a hidden alley that ended in an unexpected treasure trove of Irish culture? Did you stumble upon an anecdote of the city that left you chuckling with delight?
If so, dear listeners, please grace us with your tales. Our next episode is never quite complete without the vibrant experiences and curious tidbits from our global family of travel enthusiasts.
In our next jaunt together, we'll be unraveling the threads of another captivating destination. So make sure your passport is handy and your wanderlust fully charged.
But until then, let's raise an imaginary glass to Dublin, to discovery, and to our next escapade.
It's been an absolute pleasure, dear listeners. Keep your travel dreams close and your curiosity closer.
Indeed. And with that, we bid you slán go fóill. Goodbye for now, from the city that's stolen our hearts time and time again.
Until we meet again, have grand adventures, be they near, far, or simply within the pages of a well-spun yarn.
From Travel with Lara and Luca, this is Lara saying, may the road rise up to meet you until our paths cross next.
And this is Luca reminding you that every journey begins with a single step, or in our case, a single podcast episode. Cheers to the journey.